There is a particular kind of evening that arrives for some women after 55. You are sitting alone, or perhaps he is in the next room. The house is quiet in the ordinary way. Nothing dramatic has happened. No raised voices, no slammed doors. You simply stopped. You stopped explaining the silences. You stopped filling the spaces he left empty. You stopped absorbing what he would not name. And in that new quiet, something settles over you that is harder to ignore than any argument ever was. He is still here. He still speaks about the day, about the weather, about the children or the grandchildren. The surface holds, yet nothing deeper has moved. There is no repair. Only the same distance, now standing in full view because no one is carrying it for him anymore. If this is where you find yourself, hear me clearly. There is nothing wrong with the fact that you stopped. You were not asking for too much. You were not being difficult. For years, many women in our generation automatically became the emotional infrastructure of the relationship. You did it because it felt necessary, because you believed the whole thing might collapse if you did not. Stopping was not an attack. It was simply the first time he had to stand in front of the reality, without anyone standing between him and it. Let me tell you about Elaine. Elaine is 62. She had been married nearly 30 years. For most of those years, she was the one who kept the emotional rhythm of the house. When her husband grew quiet after a hard day, she found ways to draw him back. When distance appeared, she stepped toward it first. When something felt unresolved, she carried the weight of making it feel resolved. She did not do this because she was weak. She did it because she believed that if she did not, the life they had built together would slowly erode. 2 years ago, something shifted inside her. It was not a sudden decision. It was the accumulation of years of quiet exhaustion finally becoming visible in her body and her nervous system. She simply stopped the automatic filling. No announcement, no dramatic conversation. She just no longer rushed in to smooth what he left rough. What followed was not a crisis. He continued going to work. They still shared meals. They still talked about ordinary things, but a new emptiness entered the space between them. He did not explode. He did not suddenly become more present. He simply remained where he had always been. Only now the distance was no longer being absorbed by anyone else. That is the moment I want to look at more carefully, not from her side, but from his. For many men over 55, the pattern of silence, withdrawal, and carefully maintained distance is no longer a temporary reaction carried over from childhood. It has become something far more solid. Over 30 or 40 years, it has hardened into a structure of identity. It is the way he stayed functional, the way he remained the man who did not need to be fixed, the man who could handle things without becoming a burden, the man whose strength was measured by how little he required from others. That strategy worked. It got him through difficult seasons. It protected a version of himself that felt reliable and independent. By the time a man reaches this stage of life, that way of being is no longer just a habit. It is woven into how he experiences his own worth. As long as the woman continued to carry the emotional weight, the strategy remained protected. It could stay hidden. It did not have to face its own consequences. He could experience the distance as normal, even as a form of steadiness. The relationship could continue on the surface because someone else was still managing the cost of what he would not enter. But when she stops, something different occurs. For the first time in decades, there is no buffer. The adaptive structure that kept him invulnerable is left fully exposed. No one is standing between him and the emptiness that structure creates. This is not ordinary conflict. Ordinary conflict can be argued through, smoothed over, or waited out. This is the moment the protective architecture itself is laid bare. What many men experience in that moment is not loud anger. It is quieter than that. It is a recognition that arrives almost without words. If no one is left to absorb this distance, then the distance itself will eventually leave him alone. And at 55, 60, 65, aloneness is no longer an abstract idea. It is tied to the years that remain, to children who have their own lives, to the physical changes that make starting over feel heavier, to the quiet fear of being left behind with fewer chances to rebuild. This is why some men never truly repair. Repair would require him, even temporarily, to set aside the very structure that has kept him safe and valuable for a lifetime. It would mean standing in front of a version of himself he has never fully allowed to exist. For some men, that cost feels higher than the loneliness, so they remain. They keep the surface intact. They continue the familiar pattern while something deeper calculates, often without language, the price of continuing as he always has.
The difference between a younger man and a man at this age is significant here.
Earlier in life, there is still flexibility, still time, still the sense that change is possible without losing too much of who he has been. At this stage, the same pressure touches a layer that has been accumulating for decades. Response is often not movement toward her, but a deeper retreat into the silence, or a careful maintenance of ordinary life while the internal reckoning continues out of sight. That quiet recognition that the distance he protected as strength is now the thing that may leave him alone is the beginning of the only real pressure that can force a reckoning. Not her words, not her patience, not any technique. Simply the absence of the emotional infrastructure she once provided without being asked. What makes this recognition so difficult for a man at this stage of life is that it arrives without the usual defenses. There is no clear enemy to push against. There is no dramatic failure he can point to and say the problem is outside himself. The structure that protected him simply stops working the way it always has, because the person who absorbed its cost is no longer doing so. Inside him, something quieter than anger begins to move. He may notice the house feels different. Conversations that once felt sufficient now land with a thinness he cannot quite name. The familiar pattern of withdrawing and waiting for the tension to pass no longer resolves anything because the tension is no longer being managed by anyone else. For the first time, the distance he has lived inside for decades is experienced as his own, not as a shared arrangement. This is where the real internal calculation starts. Repair would require him to do something he has spent a lifetime avoiding. It would mean allowing the version of himself that needs something, that feels the emptiness, that does not have every answer already in place, to become visible. For many men over 55, that version has been carefully kept out of sight. It was not only private, it was treated as a liability. Strength, in the form he learned it, meant needing little and revealing less. To step toward repair is to risk the identity that has carried him through careers, through raising children, through the long middle years when competence was the primary measure of a man's value. Some men look at that cost and decide it is too high. They do not announce this decision, they simply remain. They keep the surface of the relationship intact. They continue the ordinary routines. They may even become more polite, more careful, more outwardly steady. But underneath, the same protective structure tightens. The silence deepens. The distance becomes more deliberate, not because he wants to punish her, but because returning to the familiar pattern feels safer than standing in the exposed place she has created by stepping back. Others begin a slower, more uneven process. It rarely looks like the sudden awakening that people describe in books or on stages. It looks like small, reluctant movements. A question asked that he would previously have left unasked. A moment of staying in a conversation a few minutes longer than comfort would allow. An acknowledgement, almost under his breath, that something has been missing. These movements are often incomplete. They come with resistance. They can disappear again for stretches of time, but they are different from the old pattern because they occur without her carrying the full weight of making them happen. The difference between these two responses is not primarily about how much he loves her. It is about whether there is still enough open space inside him to tolerate being seen in a way he has never fully allowed. For some men, decades of successful self-protection have left very little of that space. The architecture is too solid. The cost of dismantling even a part of it feels greater than the loneliness that may eventually follow. This is also the place where many women have been made to doubt themselves. For years, the desire for something deeper has been quietly treated as excess. You may have learned to make yourself smaller so that the relationship could continue without friction. You may have absorbed the message, spoken or unspoken, that wanting real emotional presence was somehow too much, too demanding, too emotional for the kind of man you were with. That message settles into the body. It makes you second-guess the very clarity that brought you to stop carrying what was never yours alone to carry. But the depth you brought was never the problem. The strategy he built was designed, over a lifetime, to keep that kind of depth at a manageable distance. When you stop absorbing the cost of that distance, your depth simply becomes visible again. It is no longer filtered through your efforts to make it acceptable, and its visibility is what forces the confrontation. Not because you are too much, but because the protective structure can no longer hide from what it was built to avoid. You are not too much. You have never been too much. The feeling that you were only ever reflected the gap between what you offered and what his way of staying safe could receive. What finally forces the reckoning, when it comes at all, is not a conversation, not a technique, not endless patience. It is the simple, sustained absence of the emotional infrastructure you once provided without being asked. When that buffer is gone, the adaptive strategy is left standing alone. And for the first time, a man over 55 can see with unusual clarity that the distance he protected as a form of strength is the same distance that may leave him alone in the years that remain. Some men will turn further into that distance. Some will begin, slowly and imperfectly, to step out of it. The outcome is not in your control. What is in your control is whether you continue to supply the very thing that allowed the old pattern to remain invisible. Understanding this does not require you to wait indefinitely, and it does not require you to try harder. It simply allows you to see clearly. You do not have to become the one who repairs what he has not yet chosen to face. You only have to stop automatically carrying the weight that kept the protective structure from ever having to stand on its own. From that place, the question becomes quieter and more honest. Can he meet the space that now exists, or will he continue to live inside the distance that has become home? Either answer, once seen without self-blame, protects something essential, your own peace. You no longer have to ask whether you did enough. You no longer have to hope that returning to the old role of emotional carrier will produce a different result. The clarity itself becomes a form of steadiness, and in that steadiness, you are free to respond to whatever he chooses from a place that is no longer exhausted by trying to make the relationship work on terms that required you to disappear.